Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday, the 14th of April, and you are watching episode 2 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing an insight of the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode is my guest, Brett. Geologist of more than 50 years, Director of Prima Minerals Pty Limited, and Brett is also the Far North Queensland Branch Chairman of the Australian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy. Welcome, Brett. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, good evening, Bill. Yes, I'm a geologist, as you said, over 50 years experience now. Grew up in Victoria, studied RMIT, worked me 7 years to qualify because I worked in foundation engineering, soils research, and well velocity studies for the oil industry in Western Australia. Qualified in 71, and since then I've been mainly in exploration geology, but a little bit of mining, underground mining. My basic work was, first of all, I started off at the Ranger mine in the Northern Territory. That was discovered in late 1970. I arrived there in early 71, and I was there for 2 years, looking at other targets in the area as well as working on the Ranger itself. From there, I moved to Tennant Creek. I was in the underground mines in Pico Mine and Juno Mine in Tennant, but they both closed, ran out of ore essentially. Although people are looking at them again now to reopen. But this is what happens in the mining industry: is there's always iterations of projects. From the underground, I went off to the same company in Tennant Creek, lived there for 7 years, had 4 years in the Rover field west of Tennant out towards the Territory border, and then moved to, from there I moved to Herberton. So I've been in North Queensland now for, what's that, about 31 years, I think it is. And from Herberton, I worked around the tin fields with a lot of alluvial tin miners, and then transferred over into alluvial gold, and from then moved into Cairns. Before I moved into Cairns, we moved over to Solomon Islands to live for 2 years, but only stayed about 6 months because the mines actually fell apart at that stage over there, and came back. Been in Cairns since 1986, and worked mainly in North Queensland, but also in Western Australia, around Malaysia, PNG and the Solomon Islands. A couple of visits, or a visit to South Africa. Went deep into the mines of South Africa, the Witwatersrand, and spent 15 years in exploration, fly in, fly out from Cairns into PNG. In that time, I was 6 years on Lihir, including 2 years as the actual site manager, leading into development of the mine. That mine is now producing about 1 million ounces of gold a year, and that's one of the biggest mines in the world at this stage. And I say 1 million ounces of gold a year at the moment. They'd be making a profit of somewhere around about $800 to $1,000 an ounce. So they're making fairly large, fairly substantial amounts of money. That was an interesting project, one of the best most interesting I've ever seen, because you're actually in a chain of islands there, and the Lihir deposit is actually in an active volcano. It is still pumping out steam. It is producing gold in the volcanic systems that are underneath the island itself. It's all of the island is a series of volcanoes, and it's as I said, still active. The fluid's still coming up. The age of that mineralisation is about 900,000 years, very, very young. Whereas when I went down into the Witwatersrand, that's about 1.8 billion years. And when I worked in Tennant Creek, that was about 1.7 billion years. So the gold mineralisation is covered over a wide range of ages, rock types, and various things. In that slide I've got there can see some of the other places of the Solomon Islands, Malaysia and Baluchistan. That was an interesting one up on the Afghan border, on the border of in actual Pakistan, but up close to the border of where Afghanistan joins Iran. Now, after I left,
what year was that? What was year was that? Who was there then? The Russians or the Americans?
Well, yeah, good question. I didn't pay much attention to what was going on in Afghanistan. I can't recall, to be honest. That was in about '86, but I was working for BHP, and that particular project they discovered, and that's about, there's a series of age and appropriate rocks to produce copper, and they were developing a mine at the or developing a target at the Rakal Dick, but it wasn't big enough for them, and they sold it. But essentially, they did all the exploration by camel and motorbike. In most countries, you do exploration by, and that sort of exploration for soil sampling and stream sediment sampling, you do by helicopter and four-wheel drive. But over there, it was by camel and by motorbike. There's very few helicopters in the country at that stage for private use. And it was that area a couple of years later where the Pakistanis fired off their first atomic bomb. So I was quite happy not to be there much longer. So that worked fairly well.
What about non-mining activities? Have you been associated with other sort of geology, or infrastructure or anything like that?
Well, I'll just bring up another slide of what geologists can do. And this, oh, there we've done it again. There's a whole range of things. I've actually, as I said, I've mainly been involved with mineral economics and exploration and underground mining. So exploration, underground mining, and a little bit on open cut. So what's generally called hard rock mining. But the specializations in geology. If you look at that slide, there's specializations there.
You haven't shared it. You haven't shared it.
That. I better do that. Okay.
Yeah.
How are we going there?
Yeah, we've got it up now. We've got
Right,
geology specializations.
Yeah. Okay. Look, there's just so many ways to look at things. If you come down to sort of economic side, economic geology, exploration, mining, that's what I've been talking about. And I've been mainly in minerals, but before I qualified, I was looking at oil and gas for Royal Dutch Shell. I was working out of Melbourne with Royal Dutch Shell, and they had areas with Wapit in Western Australia in the oil basins over there. And so I was doing well velocity studies. And the idea is you get some idea of what happens with sound waves projected through the rocks, and various rocks have got different characteristics that give you different sound waves. And so you can, if you look at the well velocity studies, you can interpret, you learn to interpret the seismic investigations that have been done.
Yes. So they have their own signature.
Absolutely, yeah. I've done no work on coal. Every geologist these days does a bit of GIS work. That's computer management, data management. That's sort of boomed dramatically in the last 10 years or so, and also the same in ore resources. When I worked underground in Tennant Creek, I did ore resources in those days, but it's now become a very scientific or an art form. I'm not sure whether it's science or art sometimes. It's but I haven't been involved in that technically for a few years, because what's controlled by these days is the Australasian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy and the ASX have what are called JORC resources used in the ASX and definition of resources. And so you need to be highly skilled in the style of mineralisation you're dealing with, experienced over a number of years, and highly skilled in computer management so that you can actually do the studies on the tons and grade that you are looking at. So you use the information that the geologists like myself produce from the exploration, and then you make an estimate of what's in the ground. And there's various ways of doing that, and there's various ways of classifying the joint ore reserve statements, the JORC results. And it's this science and the accuracy of it and the integrity of it that is used, particularly in the ASX, to control the ASX public companies, the IPOs, the publicly listed companies, the new IPOs coming up. And so the investors can have confidence and in the reliability and the accuracy of the mineral estimates that are in the ground, and so they can make their investment decisions on some very good scientifically supported information reported to the ASX and through the public company systems. Okay, then there's all sorts of industrial minerals. We've got a couple in North Queensland that are working quite well at the moment. Everyone knows about the silica sands at Cape Flattery, and there's more exploration for that going on. And out at Chillagoe, there is some pearlite mine. It's actually a volcanic glass that is taken then into Mareeba and treated and becomes pearlite. And of course, you couldn't have a building anywhere without the industrial materials such as either gravel, sand, or rock walls to keep the oceans at bay, or sand and concrete to build concrete buildings and make bricks. And so there's a lot of local materials that are used around Cairns. We've got quarries in the middle of Cairns. What else have we got around here? The sands out around.
You're still sharing the geology screen.
Yep. Okay, going on with the other types of geology is the engineering. The geotechnical is what I've actually worked on. I worked for CSIRO first in soils research. That was my first job, and then from that I went into foundation engineering and foundation design, and based in Melbourne, and from that I went to Tasmania working with a company called SoilMech, and we did all the soils investigations and foundation investigations for the Savage River mine in 1966. There's a lot of oceanographic studies obviously being done these days to look at coastal engineering. The geophysics that we use in mineral exploration and oil exploration too, for that matter. I use magnetics, I use radiometrics. Most rocks are variably radioactive. That's in radioactive, it's either uranium, thorium, or potassium. If you've got feldspars in a granite, for example, that rock will be radioactive. Every rock is radioactive to a certain extent, and it's the variations in these activities, the radioactivity level, that we measure, and the same with the magnetics. Every rock is essentially magnetic, and one of the things that happens is that when mineralizing fluids come through the rocks, they change the magnetic character of the rock itself. Two things can happen. If there's magnetite or magnetic minerals in the rock to start with, the fluids that come in carrying your economic minerals such as gold and copper can actually demagnetize the rocks, the minerals that are already in the rock there, and so you get a decrease in the magnetic character. And it's this variation that we pick up from either airborne. You can pick it up from high-level aircraft flying across, or you can pick it up from lower-level aircraft. You'll get helicopters are probably the lowest they get down to, and that can be sort of 20 metres above ground. The next level then is men or people walking the ground and carrying magnetometers. The same sort of applies to gravity. Because of the density of rocks, the gravity of the Earth varies depending on the density of the rock, and this is a very broad scale thing. It's not quite designed yet for minerals, economic minerals, which are more smaller affected area and more local, whereas gravity is sort of a large scale thing. So you see regional aspects you can see, and you can study the regional variations of the rocks at depth. Seismic that I've got in there is what I talked about before, looking for oil and gas, determining what's happening in the structures in the sediments below surface. Electromagnetics, and IP is electromagnetic system. That's the induced polarization. These electrical techniques, you find that some zones, some minerals associated with economic minerals, such as quartz, for example, that is often associated with gold and copper, do not conduct electricity, whereas sulfides like pyrite and pyrrhotite and arsenopyrite will conduct electricity. And so you can actually measure the variations of the electrical characteristics inside the earth, and you can actually then predict where you might go and have a look for economic mineralisation. The geochemistry, obviously this is probably the most important part of the economic world, in the sense that you need assays of everything that you do. You can't calculate an ore resource unless you've got an assay. So there are every element that you assay for basically has a different style of chemical assay. Not quite right, but there are there are so many different techniques. There are chemical techniques and a lot of other techniques like spectrophotometers that are used to determine what's in a solution that you've produced from a fine ground material. So the idea is you crush it, you grind it, you crush and grind the rock, and you take a very select sample, and there's a very scientific process in how these materials, first of all, how the sample is taken, and then how it's crushed and ground, and then how the fine material is selected, and then dissolved, and then put through various machines to actually determine the metal content of that original rock. Age dating, everyone's heard about dating rocks. Well, there's a wide range of techniques that are used in dating. I'm using dating, or will be using dating, on a project I'm working on at the moment down near Charters Towers, and it's we're looking at the different ages is significant to the different styles of mineralisation you get, and so it actually helps to look for a particular style of mineralisation. You need or it is handy to have the age date of the materials you're dealing with, so you can sort of work out which process you might have used, because some processes operate at different time frames in the geological timescale. Obviously, these days, one of the biggest things in geology exploration and mining these days is the environmental conditions, monitoring the damage that you might do while you're there, and rehabilitation as you go. A lot of these things now being planned prior to actually opening up any new project. So it's all part of the exploration process to do analysis of the water, analysis of the area around you, to do a baseline study to find out what is there before you actually start. And then obviously extraterrestrial. Well, this is an interesting one, because we have used this process now on a project I'm working on down near Charters Towers. What happened there, I met up with some guys from Oxford University, and they have been doing geological evaluation of various planets and things around the solar system using techniques that they have developed at Oxford University. And so this is as I labelled there, extraterrestrial. And what's happened now is that because they've been exploring the planets by remote control, obviously through satellites and whatever processes they use, they've now decided that if they can do it on planets, and they're fairly confident what they've done up there, they're actually starting to now look at what can be done on Earth and used in some of our projects, some of mineral exploration. And so they did a trial run over our particular ore body, which is significant, but the ore body that we're looking at the moment down near Charters Towers it dips at 45 degrees, and so it's probably about 2,000 metres deep. And so we will be a big mine if and when it gets going, or when it gets going, I should say. And what they've done, the guys from Oxford Uni have applied their extremely high-tech process with their extremely large computers in the Oxford University, and they've given us some drill targets to look at and work with.
The mining Charters Towers, what's the product they're trying to extract from there or looking at?
Gold.
Gold.
It is gold. The Charters Towers field basically is all gold. Further west, you've got Falanga, and there's base metals there, copper, lead, and zinc. Red River are mining out there at the moment, and but they're also looking at, there is some gold in the district there, so it's very much a mixed metallic area. That's west of Tennant. West of I'm getting lost now. West of Charters Towers. That's an interesting area down around the Charters Towers area. That was discovered in the 1870s, that field. And there was one, if you look at it from the old perspective, in the sense that there have been prospectors running around that district since the 1870s, 1880s. There was a mine that was discovered in 1986 by Ralph Porter that became Pajingo. That started mining in 1988. So for 100 years, this mine had not been recognised by anyone. And the thing was that the original discovery that Ralph Porter saw when he found it, it was on a quartz outcrop sticking out of the ground, and I think it went about half an ounce to the tonne, which is very, very high grade. And so the reason I mentioned that is that there are still very large parts of Australia that have not been walked by people. And a lot of organisations, particularly CSIRO, are trying to say that all of Australia has been covered, and we now must do high-tech, remote sensing, new research processes. Well, these things can be done and will be done, but my approach as an exploration geologist, as an explorationist, that there's still a lot of ground out there which I can identify, I name, and one of the reasons that they're not looked at is because they are isolated, they are remote, and it is very difficult to get to sometimes, particularly in North Queensland with the rain and the water that we have sometimes, and you can be cut off for quite some periods of time, which has happened.
And the CSIRO people wouldn't really want to leave their office anyway to find out.
I think that's one of my criticisms. I'm a bit of a cynic, I must admit. I still
just on Charters Towers in the 1890s, as you say, and the mining beforehand, it was the largest city outside Brisbane in Queensland, had its own stock exchange, and I think 104 pubs or something. It would have been, if it had sort of continued with a bit more mining, if it hadn't petered out, it probably would have been pretty well recognised as the capital of North Queensland.
Yeah, look, the stock exchange there, I think, was the first one, possibly even in Australia. I'm not sure. Certainly the first one in Queensland. That field, if you include Ravenswood in the field, and the Ravenswood and the Pajingo, the Hadley Castle, Charters Towers itself, which is the city of Charters Towers, is really sitting on top of what was 7 million ounces has been mined from there, and there is a resource underneath of probably of more than 12 million ounces still there underneath the city, and there are companies looking at how to get that out again, or get that out, I should say, not again. Once is enough. There is the plant there that has been operational for quite a few years, is under care and maintenance at the moment, but the problem with the Charters Towers mines itself, if I can just refer to the gold mineralised under Charters Towers, the mineralisation there is in veins that are very thin. And one of the problems that we have in modern technology is that, the other thing is that it dips at around about 45 degrees. So if you're looking at a quartz vein that's probably a metre thick, dipping at 45 degrees, it is difficult to physically work that with the machines that we use these days. There are techniques being developed especially for that type, but it's not, I don't think it's effective yet. So if you go back to a way it was done in the old days, in the 1800s, what they did there, it was men that drilled it with hammer and tap. And so they could get into smaller spaces and didn't have the machinery. And they actually hand-picked a lot of the ore and brought out quite high-grade ore. And so they were treating high-grade ore. Whereas what's there now is some of it is high-grade, but it's very thin. And it extends over quite large distances vertically and horizontally. But it's a very expensive process to get down to the depth and then mine it with machinery. I'm looking at the Hadley Castle, and the difference there is that the veins, although they dip at 45 degrees, are thicker. And we are now finding that there are a lot more veins that are actually closer together, so they can be mined a lot easier, most modern machinery. Whereas over at, and that mine will go down to 2,000 metres depth when we get it going again. That will be quite large. Over at Ravenswood, which is about 45 or so kilometres east of Tartar's Towers, the company there now, they've only been there, ERM have been there about 8 or 12 months now. They bought it off Resolute. They have a resource of 200 million tonnes of 0.8 grams in an open cut. That's a very, very large open cut, 200 million tonnes of ore. The grade is also very, very low, but they do have a very large plant that they're upgrading at the moment to about 7 million tonnes of rock through it a year. And then that will be treated in the mill that they've got. And that plant and mill originally came from Kidston. So again, you go back to the iterations of mining. Kidston was mined in again in the 1800s. And then, probably about 25, 30 years ago, it was mined again by Placer Pacific and left 2 large open pits and also a lot of tailings sitting on the surface. And it is that is now being used to produce pumped hydro system from the dams that is there, or the dam that is there, using the 2 pits and the tailings that is level on the surface to hold a wind farm and also a very large solar farm. So what I'm getting at,
morning sunshine.
Yeah, well, the whole idea is to use the solar during the day and the wind when it blows, which is not good for direct input into the state grid, but is useful to pump the water uphill and then run it back downhill and run it through a hydro scheme so they can produce electricity essentially 24 hours a day. So that sort of thing actually works. And this is one of the things that intrigues me. We have movements afoot in the environmental movements to close down old open cuts in mining. And that's a very good example of why it would be not a good idea to infill the old open cuts. If those open cuts had been infilled, backfilled after mining had been completed, they would not be able to produce this power that they're producing now. And the same goes for the Hadley Castle. When we get it going next, it will be the 6th iteration of mining since mining started in 1874. And there's others that will support others in the area, and there'll be probably 100, 150 new jobs in that area. And the district will be opened up for other ventures as well, not just gold mining and cattle, but there's other potential that you can work with tourism in the area as well. Once you get new roads in an area, tourism can be facilitated. People are travelling around Australia and particularly Queensland and looking for new areas of interest. And this is where an interaction between tourism with mining can be advantageous for the district.
just on that, with open pits, I mean, even if you don't have a use for them in regards to making hydro and that, the fact that most of them fill with water anyway, I mean, that's just a boon to have a water storage area there for nature and one thing or another, and recreation. So it's just, I suppose.
That works. And the other thing too is if you look at what happened out at Mundara, out at Mount Isa, the CSIRO NASI study some years ago looked at that, and what they showed was that the presence of the big dams that they got there changed the humidity of the area and grew more and varieties of vegetation, and also increased the wildlife around the dams. And so you increase the water content through dams. You can have direct input for farmers, for stations. It can be used, they can be utilised. There are roads left over that the stations can be used. And so it's not just a matter of mining, making a mess, making a big hole, but it can interact with the community and provide a lot more for the future.
Well, it provides amenity, that's one thing. And in the driest inhabited continent, anywhere we can pull some water isn't a bad thing.
Well, from my perspective, and this is from my perspective, I've been in Northern Australia now since 1971. Before that, I did some research with CSIRO in the Sedimentary Basin out of Katherine, and had to do work studies there. We were actually working for the British Army, the American Army, and the Australian Army, doing terrain evaluation, looking at what would happen if heavy armed forces travelled across northern Queensland. We did it in the dry season and we did it in the wet season to see what the difference would be, and we were able to physically measure the difference. That's back in 1971. But and now getting back to the NASI study. Hang on, I've lost the plot, Bill.
Oh, I was just talking about having
water's advantage. Yeah. I take the approach that every 6 to 7 years we have a massive rainfall event in North Queensland, and if you look at, I can bring up a map of Queensland. I'll talk to you later. But if we look at this one, I'll just reduce that down a bit. You can see that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Double click.
How's that?
Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah, that's a large map of Queensland.
Okay. If we go back to 2008, just talking about water, forget about the minerals and the geology there at the moment. Lockhart River is sort of up the pointy end, and Cairns is here, and Corumba is out in this area over here. It's about 100,000 square kilometres. That area had a rainfall event in February, I think it was 2008, where in that 1 month, 1 metre of rain fell. Now, that is not an unusual situation in North Queensland, where you have a massive rainfall event like that, and it took 4 or 5 or 6 months for that water to all get away back out to the Gulf again. And we have nothing to catch any of that water. And that happens, as we know, just recently in New South Wales. We've seen it happen in Queensland. Every 5 or 6 years, we do get these massive rainfall events, and we need to build dams to catch them. Okay.
Well, while we've got that map, we might as well talk about the value of mining to the nation and the state in regards to.
What I might do is go back to. Okay, we'll start there. We've got to start somewhere. If you look at that, the yellow in the southeast corner is what's called a basin. These are sedimentary basins. The yellow there, the green, and the purple are sedimentary basins. They're actually part of the Great Artesian Basin. The Great Artesian Basin runs right up through Queensland and essentially up to the Cape York, right through there. The yellow bit over here is the oldest rocks in Queensland, so it's It sticks out of the ground. It's not a basin as it is now, or what we call a basin. It's the oldest rocks in Queensland too, the Lower Proterozoic, about 1,700 million years old, and that includes the Mount Isa and all the copper fields out there. And if you look at that, then you can see that there's mines that are produced or are there. There's a lot of copper mines, obviously. There's lead, zinc, and silver in the Mount Isa itself. There's other mines there that produce copper with gold. Iron ore there. There's a lot of gold about. Silver in a lot of the copper mines. There's some rare earths, including rhenium. There's obviously uranium at the old Mary Kathleen mine that's got rare earths associated with it. Oil shales out in this area, and up to Corumba, there's oil shales back up this way to the north. There's oil shales out through here. There's oil shales right through the Great Artesian Basin, particularly the green one, which is the Galilee. That's the biggest untapped source of coal in the world. There's phosphate out near Mount Isa being mined for fertiliser. So it's one of the richest areas that we've got. And Weipa obviously produces bauxite, and there's more bauxite being mined north of Weipa, and Rio, who own Weipa, are developing just south of what you can see there is an inlet, and this area here is the Amrun deposit being developed now. And to the south, down near the town of Arakoon, there is what's called the Arakoon deposit that was being developed by Glencore at the moment, the Swiss company that also own Mount Isa. That deposit, or series of deposits, really extend over 75 kilometres north-south and about 30 kilometres east-west. Now, Weipa has been going since 1965, and there's more resources there that will take them from another 40 years, so that'll be over a 100-year mine life. The Amrun deposit is probably another 100-year mine life, and possibly talking the same thing down in Amrun with with Arakoon down there for Glencore. That's had a checkered history. The Queensland government, in their wisdom, gave the rights to that to the French government. I think it's Pétionnet, about 30 or more than that. They had it for about 25 to 30 years. The French government, then they did nothing with it. So the Queensland government took it off them, gave it to the Chinese government, a company called Chinalco. They did nothing with it for about 20 years, and now they've taken it off them, and it was put out to tender about 2 or 3 years ago, and that tender was won by Glencore. There were some Australian companies that tendered for it, and that now is being investigated, and the feasibility studies are being done, and all the preliminary work is being done at the moment to develop that project.
You would think these leases, because I'm from Western Australia, and we had a lot of mining over there as well in the north, especially ore deposits. And I remember a case going on there where I think one of the Australian companies had a lease, and they'd had it for 25 or 30 years and done nothing with it. And for some reason, they let it lapse. They forgot to renew it or something. And someone came in,
yes,
peaked it, and they claimed it. But the government turned around and nullified that person's claim and reissued to the original company on the basis they thought it was just an oversight, and that this company would eventually do something with it. And I think it was even 10 years later, they still hadn't. So you would think with these leases, there would be a drop-dead date. If you haven't developed something, well, then it at least just goes out anyway. I mean, it seems ridiculous that some people can hold on to these leases for so long and not develop it.
Yeah, look, there's a whole range of questions to get into on that one. Sometimes the metals are out of popularity and not popular, and so there's no price for them. That's probably the most common. And then when the price develops, the company's got to be in sync and have the money to do it at the time. and quite often the company can put a lot of effort into a project and not actually see something on the ground, but have developed all of the technical aspects of the knowledge of the project, and it's all ready to go, and then the price drops. Then there's political things that happen. Look, I don't know exactly the one you're talking about, but normally what happens if a lease is terminated for whatever reason, it does not get reinstated. So it would have been interesting to find out the reasons why that was reinstated. Normally that just does not happen. And there have been cases where companies have lost the project because they didn't make the renewal and they have lost it. Mount Isa, that was discovered in 1860s, I think it was, somewhere there. And that's basically been going since the 1860s. And that's still got quite a few years left. I don't know how much is left, but it's one of the biggest mines of the world. That's a huge project. And that's changed hands a few times from various owners. It's still going, and it's a very deep mine, and it does get very hot, but it has got it produces lead, zinc, copper, and silver. And there's and that provides the refinery in Townsville for the zinc refinery and the copper refinery, owned by the Korean companies in Townsville. Oh, pardon me. And on top of that, obviously another refinery that everybody knows and loves in Townsville, the nickel refinery. That nickel was originally started. The nickel was originally produced there from Greenvale, and then it was continued on when the Greenvale mine stopped. The nickel ore was brought in from New Caledonia. And I think everyone's heard the stories or a lot of stories about where it is at the moment. But there's a company at the moment redeveloping the nickel cobalt deposits that were the Greenvale laterites. And one of the things of interest at the moment is everyone's talking about rare earths, and there's a metal in there called scandium. And this is where it gets interesting because it is a rare metal, and it can be used. There's only about 11 kilos produced per year, so it's hard to actually make something out of it. The advantage of it, a technical advantage of it, is that if you make aluminium wafers and pass methane gas over it, it creates electricity. So there is a use there. And the other thing is that if you add the scandium to the aluminium, it reduces the weight of aluminium for aircraft, and so you can actually reduce the weight of aircraft using scandium. But the problem is there's no one doing it because there's not enough produced, and the people who own it couldn't produce enough. You know, it's a circular argument. You haven't got enough, so therefore you've got no market. But that's still recognised, and people are working on that. The coal areas that you can see there, the most popular one, everybody knows and loves, is the Bowen Basin. This one here in the blue.
You're not sharing at the moment.
I can't just see
You're not sharing. You aren't sharing your screen at the moment.
I thought I did. Sorry. How's that?
You're coming back. Yeah, you're back now.
Okay. Well, what I was talking about there, I'm sorry, was the Mount Isa area in there. There's Mount Isa, and there's a lot of copper mines in that district around there that produce, and some of the rare earths in there with Mary Kathleen. The blue area there is the Bowen Basin with a lot of coal mines, and the green is the Galilee Basin, but it's the stripy areas there on the map that shows where the coal is, and this coal, the coal that we have, I shouldn't use that word, the coal that has been identified and in book resources, not just sort of suppose where it is, but identified and calculated grade and tonnes, is enough in these two areas here to continue mining for over 300 years at our current production rate of around about 240 million tonnes a year. we can produce 240 million tonnes a year for the next 300 years of the same material, just keep going. And that's without even exploring the rest of the Galilee Basin.
It's pity, but we're trying to close coal down.
Well, if you close coal down, there's about 48,000 jobs direct in the coal industry in Queensland, so you lose those straight away.
Well, it's nonsense in the fact that, Africa's planning to build thousands of power stations in the long term. I mean, China's still doing it, so there's still demand there. I mean, some people have a vision that we'll get away from fossil fuels, but I think it's still here for some time to come. And it's a strategic advantage of Australia. This is it always has provided us with cheap electricity. It gave us a competitive edge. And it's basically only government policies and rules and regulations over the last 15 years that have increased our price of electricity. Otherwise, we'd still have cheap electricity and competitive. On that note, it used to be said that we lived on the back of the sheep in Australia, and agricultural things like wheat and that. But it's definitely now got to the situation, our export dollars that come in for foreign exchange, there's a lot of that comes from West Australian mining and North Queensland mining, or Queensland mining in general.
Well,
what is the value to the nation and the state of our mining?
The royalties from the coal is about $4 billion. Oh, let me get this straight. Is about $4 billion just from the coal alone. But the overall figures, I sort of have trouble with figures because there's just so many of them. If you look at export earnings from mining in the Mackay area, which is, so where's Mackay? Mackay is here. You can see that. So the export earning from this area here at the moment is $14 billion, and that's money from coal. That's the export dollars. From far North Queensland, which is sort of up this way to the north of Cairns, including Weipa and this area up here, it's about $1 billion from mining. And Western Queensland, which is this area over here, the big mines over here, Mount Isa and Ernest Henry and the rest of them, they provide about $5 billion. So there's, just from mining alone in Queensland, there's about a $20 billion export earnings. But if we lose the coal, there's a direct royalties paid of $4 billion. If we lost the coal, we will lose $4 billion into the budget straight away. And there's nothing in Queensland at this stage that would replace that. Now,
it's not just the royalties, it's the
wages. Just the royalties.
Yeah.
Forget about the wages.
Yeah.
Wages, you got to think about the wages. 48,000 people, what do they earn? $140,000 a year each or something like that? I mean, they start at probably 100, go up to 250 or 300 or whatever it might be. Some of the wages are pretty good. And on top of that, you've got the company profits, company taxes that have got to be paid. All of that is enormous and would be lost. Now, there is one way to replace it, and that is, dare I suggest it, which is, I think, a bit of, it'll never come off, and I'll go into that in a minute, but if I can just bring up another one for you. Look, there's a few there, and that's the Project Iron Boomerang, if I can find it. There it is.
Yep.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay. So here's the coal fields over here in Queensland. I might blow it up a bit.
That's it.
Here's your coal fields in Queensland here, and your iron ore fields over here. The idea is to build a smelter park at 5 smelter parks on the coast, and 5 smelter parks over in the west. And you train the iron ore to Queensland and the coal to Western Australia, and you produce in the smelter parks, 5 at each end, you produce 8% of the world's steel. It would employ 75,000 people in total, and it would put $27 billion into government coffers every year, state and federal, 3 states and the feds. $27 billion a year. Now, this project has been around for quite a long time, but it's not going anywhere. It was in the Senate Select Committee August last year, but it just can't seem to get any further. The pollies are interested.
Just on that project, we had Shane Condon on our podcast last year, giving us a bit of a rundown on it.
Yep.
And what they're really searching for from the government in the initial thing is just to give it major project status. That sort of accelerates the process, and not looking for, from my understanding, they're not really looking for money from the government. They're simply looking for.
They're looking for money from the government for the feasibility study. And that would cost probably about $200 million. And they're looking for, as you said, for declaration of project of significance. And once they do all of that, the money that is required to build it, which is obviously going to be in the billions, has already been, I wouldn't say allocated, but Shane, I think, knows where the money will come from.
Yeah, where the investors are.
From sovereign funds. In other words, other countries' governments putting the money into Australia, where the Australian government won't put the money in.
Well, if I can just touch on another subject there. We've got a situation, I think it's Murchison hydrogen, and they've got, in brackets, a project, a $53 billion project to produce hydrogen in West Australia.
Yeah.
Now,
that's the Marcy or something, I think, isn't it? BCI.
I'm not sure. But within about 6 months, they managed to get major project status from the government simply because it's hydrogen, renewable energy, but at the moment there is actually no infrastructure anywhere in the world yet to take this sort of volume of hydrogen, and there's no real market for it. I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand the hydrogen market, what you need to do to actually distribute hydrogen. And I think their plan, because shipping hydrogen as in its pure form requires extreme compression of the gas and very strong containers to hold it, they're looking at it, shipping it out as ammonia. So they draw down, they use solar power and wind power and electrolysis to make the hydrogen, and they draw down nitrogen from the atmosphere, combine it to make ammonia, and they ship the ammonia off in large ships to some place all over the world and transfer ammonia to the shore of these countries, and then they separate it again. That's a huge undertaking.
It's a massive process of multiple processes.
Yeah, the amount of energy in each of those stages in that is huge for the output of electricity that you'll actually get from the hydrogen. And it's simply based on getting the fuel for their wind farms and solar panels is free, and then that will take care of the costing. I think it's a bit far-fetched, but anyway, we'll see.
I think it's far-fetched. Bill, before we wind up, there's one thing I'd like to show you, and that is, you see that?
Not yet.
My smartphone.
No, you haven't got that yet.
How do I've lost you. Oh, there we are. There we go. Share screen. Yeah, got it now. There you go.
It's coming up. There's a smartphone.
All right. Now, this is what goes into a smartphone. What makes a smartphone? Okay, we've got gold. Now, this is all in North Queensland. We've got gold, we've got graphite at Croydon, tantalum and lithium at Mount Surprise. Very small quantities, but at least it's there. Nickel, I mentioned before, and nickel and cobalt at Greenvale. all of these things are in a smartphone. Silica at Cape Flattery, copper at Thalanga I mentioned before, and also at Mount Isa, tin, which is a big tin field in the Herberton Mount Garnet area, and that area also has a lot of indium. Red River up, we're exploring for that now, and we've got iron ore in Queensland at Mount Moss, it's outside Townsville, and Mount Ruby and Mount Lucy up near Mount Garnet. Magnesium is mined down at Rockhampton, and antimony, there's a lot of antimony up in the Mareeba area. And obviously it always needs rare earths, and there are rare earths that are not being mined at the moment, but in very extensive deposits in the river systems of northern Queensland, there is what's called monazite, and that has a lot of rare earths in it. The problem with that, of course, is it also has uranium and thorium, which is probably the reason it's not being mined. But there are a lot of rare earths, and if that could be separated safely and securely, we could supply a lot of the world rare earths out of that.
In fact, when people talk about rare earths, there are some things that are classified rare earths, but they're in great volume. But it's usually the process of that makes them somewhat difficult to get.
The problem with rare earths is exactly that, is the processing. And we're more environmentally conscious than China at the moment. And the way I see it is that they may have lots of resources, but they also have, how can I be sort of not cynical, but
subtle.
They can actually produce the materials, and they're not probably as concerned about the waste as we would be. I don't know, and I probably shouldn't say that, but the thing is, they are probably the biggest producers of rare earths in the world. And this is one of the problems the world is facing. The rest of the world will need rare earths. America doesn't have much. We have some in the Northern Territory and in Western Australia. There's some good deposits, but they're being looked at and being researched for quite a few years. And at one stage, some of the material was going to be treated, produced, the ore taken over to Malaysia for treatment. But I think that's been stopped now for the same reasons, as that waste products and pollution is a problem. And once those things are addressed, we can then start to provide rare earths. But it's that control of the waste products is the major problem, I believe, with rare earths in Australia.
But just on that, rare earths are a very important component for renewables. Both solar panels and wind turbines, there's a great need for various rare earths. Do you think,
yeah. Look,
as long as a product is required for renewables and preventing global warming, I bite my tongue when I say that. Do you think governments will sort of be more able or willing to open mines or get them open faster because the end use, whereas you don't think?
No, absolutely not. No. Our first concept, our first idea, the first response, the first control in Australia is the control of the environment. And if we cannot pollute the environment, and if we don't mine if we can't control the waste products from rare earth production, then it won't happen. We've got to get our products from overseas. Now, it's very, you're right, it's very significant, because if you look at wind turbines, for example, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but what I believe, I think it's rhenium, that if you add rhenium to the metals, the iron that make up the magnets that are used in the turbines, if you didn't have the rare earths, those magnets would be 4, 5, 6 times the size they are now. So imagine the size of that sitting up there, so very big. They basically would not exist as they are now without the rare earths. That's just a matter of fact. You can't do it.
So if we're not willing to dig it out of the grounds ourselves and we want renewables, well, why should our government be so willing to let other countries mine it and pollute their environment. Like we've got the situation, you've obviously probably seen it on clips and that around the place of in African countries, kids mining cobalt, down little holes and things like that.
Absolutely.
If it's not acceptable for us to mine it here because of the problem, surely we'd have to sort of hesitate. Well, why we want to import a product knowing that it's being gained from some exploitation?
I get the point. What you're talking about is we're quite happy with the hypocrisy of it. But if you look at cobalt mining, there is a lot of cobalt mining around the world that is not done by child labour, particularly cobalt. There are a lot of big mines around the world that's just an economic necessity for the people of Africa who are doing that. That artisan mining is their choice, and their governments allow that to happen. Now, we probably, in our morality, we should probably say we will not use the cobalt from that area. Now, how we do that, I have no idea. It has happened with, I think, blood diamonds. That's because the diamonds are identifiable as to where they come from. So that has actually worked, and it works also, I believe, with things like ivory. But when you put cobalt onto the cobalt market or metal market around the world, I'm not sure that you can actually identify the actual source.
Nice.
So that
just on some of those mines, but like especially lithium mines, I've seen photos of lithium mines in especially South America. There's big deposits in that, and there's always been concerns. I think lithium's fairly soluble.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep.
And
not so much lithium, but the lithium salts that carry the lithium. Yes.
Yeah. And there's always been a bit of a problem with leaching, especially when you're mining it somewhere in the Amazon sort of area where you have large rainfalls. So those consequences where other countries' environments are damaged, shouldn't they also play a bit of a part in regards to whether you advance a certain technology or that if you've got to let other countries destroy their environment?
Oh, this is the same around the world, though, Bill. I mean, if you look at the hypocrisy of products around the world, we import timber from Malaysia and probably also from Papua New Guinea. We don't mine our own yet. There's clear felling of those areas that I worked 15 years in PNG and I've seen clear felling up there. And we might import our products from there through other countries, particularly from Malaysia or China, but we won't cut down our own trees.
With Australian big trees have become sacred.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that we have environmental controls on our timber products here, but we get it from another country. We don't have the same environmental controls. It's the same when we buy prawns from Vietnam. We have environmental controls on our prawns and our fish in Australia, but we don't have the same environmental controls of where those prawns come from the local farms in Vietnam. I've seen some of those. I'm not impressed.
Well,
I'm sorry, but I mean, what I'm getting at, and I should write a book on hypocrisy and the way the world works, because it is hypocritical. But we have all these rules that we don't apply. We apply them to ourselves, not to anyone else.
Yeah, but it's usually to our detriment and our economy's
always
detriment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, forestry. I mean, it's another topic altogether. But we had some of the largest crops of untapped timber in the world, and it only has two uses now. It is either get old and get destroyed by raging bushfires, or just get old, fall down and rot and produce methane. You can't harvest it to be something useful.
Yeah. That's
my cynical take on it.
Yeah, no, just getting back to the mining industry, I'll just give you a comment, getting away from the politics of it all. I'll just show you something that I find interesting, if I can find it. Here. Okay, so I'll have to share that again. Here we go. Here we go. Right.
Yeah, we're coming.
This is just a series of comments about the geology of North Queensland. Okay, the sea level rose 20,000 years ago. Where we are now, the sea level rose 120 metres. In fact, it's probably only about 12,000 years. I think I might have that out there. I think it's about 12,000 years ago. The sea level rose 120 metres, and it actually got about 2 metres above where we are now, 6,000 years ago, and it's retreated to where it is now. So that is sea level rise, 120 metres. That's serious sea level rise. And if you have a look on my Facebook site, I put a post up there today about ice cores from Iceland. What we're actually going through at the moment is we're just coming out of the coldest period in the last 10,000 years. And we've started to measure meteorological surveys and studies from what was the coldest period. And we're coming out, it is warming now. We are in a warming phase, but we're coming out of what was the coldest period in 12,000 years. Anyhow, that's an aside. The other bit I wanted to mention was that if you look at the Atherton tableland basalts, they're only 12,000 years old. And there were, when I went to a conference in Townsville many years ago, there were Aboriginals there who had a trouble memory of the volcanoes. And the other thing is that if you look at Undara, everyone knows and loves the lava tubes, they're 90,000 years old. And Kinrara, which is next door to, or across the road from Undara, Kinrara volcano is 4 million years old. The point that I'm trying to make is that Kinrara at 4 million, Undara at 90,000, and Atherton tableland at 12,000. If you're talking geological times, the volcanism has not stopped. It's just quiescent. Think about that one. Okay, the next one, the pyramid down here at Gordonvale is granite. And to be a granite, it's a coarse-grained, equally granular rock. It's got to form at least 1,000, if not 2,000 metres below the surface of the Earth. If it does not form that far below the surface of the Earth, it will be a different rock. But it's a granite, so therefore it was formed at least 1,000 metres. Now, the top of it is granite. So that means at least 1,000 metres of rock has been eroded off the top of the Gordonvale pyramid. And all of that has gone out to be the foundation for the barrier reef that the sea level rose to form about 12,000 years ago. You see how it's all connected?
Yep.
And this is all stuff that we can see almost sitting from home. This is the impact. And if you look at the original geology of where the town of the city of Cairns is, it's all swamps and sand dunes. And you can see that in the construction when there is building, you can see that there are swamps encountered, or there are loose sands encountered in the foundations. And this is why some of the foundations around here, particularly in the city area, have a few problems. I thought I'd like to get that one across to you as well. That's just the reaction, the sort of interaction between people and the geology. Without the sea level,
one of the biggest problems with people, they can't comprehend seem to comprehend that we've only been here for the blink of an eye compared to what's been going on the Earth over billions of years.
Absolutely.
And somehow they just think somehow everything's always been the same, and it should always continue to be the same. But obviously the past tells us we've never had a period where we don't change. It's sometimes it's a slow, gradual, and not very noticeable change. Other times it's a rapid change. But the expectation people have is that everything should just be a constant, and it's just so hard to get into the picture. Well, with the Great Barrier Reef, only 12,000 years ago, it wasn't it was, it was above, it was above ground because the sea, because the sea level was much further out during the height of the ice age.
Yep.
When we moved into this interglacial period, that's the only time that area out there that was walkable for another probably 50 or 60 kilometres.
Yes.
That's all underwater now, and that's why you have the reef now.
Well, one of the things I've always thought about, and I made an offer a few years ago. I won't try and explain it all, but anyhow, I tried to talk to some of the local people about putting on a play that told the story of the Aboriginals walking out to what is now the Outer Barrier Reef. Because if you look at it, the water is only 30 metres deep most of the way out there, and that water has come across. Once it got up to that level, it would have come across that water pretty quickly. But the thing is, that's a wave cut platform formed by the loss of the top of the pyramid. And if you look at that, there's my nice little picture about the Gordon Vale Pyramid. And what I'm saying is, this point, the top of it is 920 metres above sea level. But there was at least 1,000 metres, if not 2,000 metres, eroded off the top of it. And that is the foundation for the reef. And it's reasonably flat all the way out from here, from the pyramid, out to the reef, or to the outer barrier reef, where it drops off very quickly, down into 1,600 metres of deep water. Now, the Aboriginals would have walked across that, and they would have camped on it. They would have lived in the lagoons, in the swamps, in the sand dunes, and there would have been middens. And I think that somewhere in the future, there will be research programs trying to identify where the people lived under that water. That's an interesting one for you.
Yeah. Well, Brett, it's been very interesting. It's just gone 8:15. It's time to sort of wrap up the evening. I'd like to thank you for being on. If you just stay connected for a little while, we'll just wrap up the show and come back to you.
Righto. Thanks, Bill.
Well, thanks very much, Brett.
I appreciate it. Enjoyed it. I think there's a lot more we can talk about. There's always a lot more. There's a lot of mines and things that are happening in North Queensland. Now the other thing is, I'd like to put a plug in for the OSI-MM. If you've got a few minutes.
Yep.
We're having the mining roundup in May, on the 27th of May in Cairns. We've been doing this since 2008, so it's 13 years now. It's a one-day session where mining companies talk about the projects, not just geology and mining, but native title issues, environmental issues, legal issues, all sorts of things. It's only related to Far North Queensland. And the other thing I'd like to mention is the Far North Queensland branch of the OSI-MM, who I represent, and I am the chair. We have a fund in there called the Max Eden Bursary, and we try to donate $2,000 or $3,000 to students who want to go to university anywhere in Australia, but they must come from North Queensland. We like to provide first year and second year university students with funding of around the order of $2,000 to $3,000. It's a grant. And we have a lot of money that we cannot give away. We cannot get applications from any year 12 students in Cairns at all. We're completely disappointed, thoroughly disillusioned with the Cairns district, because no student wants $2,000 to $3,000 granted. So if someone out there listening and seeing this has a student finishing up year 12 this year, or starting, or is now in first year of uni or second year in uni, a mining related subject. These days, mining related subjects can be very broad. We're obviously into geology, mining, and metallurgy and surveying, environmental matters. That's obviously into it. But I would suggest we can also take it further, because if you look at what happens in the mining industry, mining companies run towns and they need people to run those towns. So there are ways that perhaps we could look at granting some money to students who are interested in entering the mining industry.
Well, I suppose the best way to go is all through Facebook, I suppose, for different, the schools have
Well, we
different,
tried that. We had a $10,000 program with News Corp, and they said they would make the digital approach using the digital techniques that they had to particularly focus on year 12, year 11, year 12 students, their parents, their teachers, and we got no applications. It cost us $10,000 to do the advertising on Facebook and other digital streams as well, and we got nothing out of it. So we have $83,000 available to give away at $2,000 or $3,000 a pop, and we're going to we're discussing this at the moment. We'll probably move it to Townsville.
Oh, that's
because
very sad.
Cairns is not interested.
Well, maybe they're just afraid of might be involved in getting in something that's got a bit of hard work and outdoors where there's no air conditioning.
Yeah, well, Townsville have got a uni down there that are doing some earth sciences, and there's a student chapter in the ISIWM in Townsville these days, so we'll probably be talking to them in the near future. But it's a bit disappointing that we couldn't do better in Cairns. It's been going for about 35 years now, since Max Eden died. He died of cancer. He was a mining engineer on the Atherton Tablelands, mining alluvial tin with his wife and three daughters. Two of the daughters and his wife are still up there. But we've had little joy. We've sponsored probably about 20 students over about 35 years.
Ready for it to dry up now.
Yeah. So we'll probably be doing something about it in the near future.
Okay then, Brett. Thanks very much.
Okay,
I'll just wrap it up here. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you again. Next week, we'll be having Sean Jackson, farmer, horticulturist, and innovator. Sean Jackson was instrumental in developing the seedless watermelon, and his latest project was the development of a thin-skinned yellow pumpkin with a yellow vine. Since we last talked to him last year, he's managed to get that developed and into production in regards to the processing to make dried powder, which is high content of keratin. Is now being shipped to Japan and to African countries. So we'll be catching up with him and see what it's taken to get his project that far. So next week it'll be Sean Jackson from Lakelands. With that, I'll wrap up tonight. So if you enjoyed the show, please like, friend, and follow Regional Rap on Facebook or on YouTube. Like and subscribe. This is Bill Bates wrapping up Regional Rap Wednesday, the 14th of April. Thank you.